welcome everyone to our 20th celebration. I really appreciate everybody coming. It's a big deal for us, right? 20 years. It's been a lot of fun. It's been a great time. I thought the other day, 20 years. I'm thinking, I'm glad I started when I was 12, so I keep telling myself that. But anyway, through the years, I've given a lot of tours to a lot of people. And, so that I give them a tour, and at the end they say, wow, you really did a great job. And I try to remind people all the time. I said, yeah, that's true, but, it's not just me, right? There's 12 other people here that work 40 hours a week, sometimes more. Then we have volunteers, and we have part-time employees. So if I could just we have a lot of staff members here today, so if I could get all the staff members to just please stand up for a minute, be recognized. I mean, a lot of them have been here a long time. Some of them have been here 20 years. So a lot of what you see is, you see a little bit of me and a little bit of everybody else. I mean, everybody else here does a lot of work. Also, I'd like to recognize we have two of our board members here, Bob and Ellen. If they could please stand up, be recognized, please. So anyway, I want to kind of talk about the history of the MG. My MG, and it really started with my dad. In 1954, 1955, he was stationed in Germany. He was in the Army. He was a private. He was an accountant that worked at a printing press that printed ration coupons for the German people back then. And he actually wanted to buy an Austin Healey 3000, but he was a private and he couldn't afford an Austin Healey 3000. So he bought a brand new 1954 MGTF. And for years, I mean, he talked about his car for years, but, he never talked about having pictures of it. So my thought was there are no pictures that survived of it. He never took any pictures of it. In the 50s, people didn't, it's not like nowadays where people snap pictures of everything. And when I was down in Florida on Father's Day helping him move some boxes around, he was looking through there, and I'm like, gee, Dad, this is a picture of an old TF. What is this? He goes, oh, that's me with my TF back in the day when I was in Germany. So I'm like, Dad, I never knew any pictures existed of your TF back then. So this is actually a picture of him and his 54 TF. He was also a camera buff. And he told me because they got long vacations, so he could travel, like, I don't know if this is in Italy or wherever it is. It might be in Germany. But also, he used to smoke, as I can see from that picture. So, but it was neat to actually have a few pictures. He had about 10 pictures of his original TF. And if you can flip to the next one, there he is doing some photography, and someone else is obviously taking a picture of him. And then flip again, and that's a picture of his TF. That must be one of his friends. But the interesting thing about this picture is there's a Lloyd 600 van in the background, which is a pretty obscure car. We have a Lloyd 600, but when I was looking at these, I'm like, wow, there's a Lloyd 600 in the background of that one. So, and then one more, and here's another picture, and there's a Fiat Topolino in the background, which actually probably back in the day, all that stuff was still running around. So I thought that was interesting. So he moved, my dad grew up in Romeo, Michigan, or actually Elmont, Michigan, north of Detroit. So in 55, he moved back to Romeo. And within about a year and a half, he got married and was starting a family. And he realized having a 1955 sports car with no heater in a northern climate was totally impractical. So the TF went. He sold his TF. And then if we fast forward to 1967, he got this urge to have another TF. I would have been 7 at that point. He looked around the Detroit area. He found a car that was in fairly bad condition. It ran, but it was kind of the only one he could find. So he bought it, and we took it in the first year he had it. We took it to a couple. There were like Michigan. There were local Michigan meets for MGT series, and there was like an Ohio club. Took it to a couple of meets. And then we went out. The big meet was the New England MGT Register had a big meet out on East Coast it was in the summer. And they would get, it was only MGT series, they would get 150, 200 cars. And if you flip to the next one, there, so this is my mom and that's me. We actually went to one of those big meets, but we didn't take his TF because it wasn't in good enough condition to drive that far. So we can flip again. There's me at the meet standing in front of somebody else's TD. I can't remember where that was at on the East Coast, the first meet we went to. Flip again. There's in front of a TF at the same meet. Yep, one more. Yeah, same picture, guess, more or less. Another one. So we'll leave it at that one. So he quickly realized that he wanted to go to the meets out east and he wanted to do more traveling. So he realized we needed to restore the car. So we started in the spring of 1968 to tear the car apart to restore it. Now, my dad was an accountant, so his mechanical skills were pretty limited, but you know, he had some mechanical skills. But what he did was, we had the car in our two-car garage, and he would go to work in the morning and he'd say, okay, Jeff, take off the front fender today, right? Or take off the radiator, take the seats out and everything like that. So I basically, and this is me actually, and that's my friend Greg, so that's the car in the garage as we're kind of tearing it apart. So we spent the summer taking the car apart, which was, I mean, my mechanical skills obviously were not that good, and there wasn't any YouTube, so I was kind of just doing it on my own. The other thing was, it was a very rusty car. You know, it was a Michigan car, and that's when we used to get a lot of snow, and they used a lot of salt. And one of the things that a lot of the bolts wouldn't come off, right? I mean, you would start to take them off, and they were totally rusted. And in that case, you would try to like snap the bolt off, and then it would come apart. In a lot of cases, as you were trying to do that, the bolt wouldn't snap, and the nut would round off. And in that case, we used what the generic term I call it was a nut cracker, right? It probably had another term. And this is, it's funny because I asked Greg, like a year ago, I was trying to do something and I kind of needed a nut cracker. And I asked Greg, our restoration technician, I said, do we have a nut cracker? And he's like, what is that? And so we don't have a nut cracker here, but what a nut cracker was basically a C-shaped tool like this. This was the nut. There was like a chisel on this side, and then there was this screw thing, and you had a head here, and you screwed down on the nut, and you tried to break it in half, okay? I bet 20% of the bolts on that car came apart like this. I called it the knuckle breaker, because what happened as a little kid like that is I wasn't that strong, and so I'd have the wrench on this nut to try to get all the tension on it, and it wasn't enough tension, so I'd have to get an extension on the ratchet or something, and then it would slip, and then it was broken knuckle time. But anyway, we got the car apart, and what happens with taking a car apart, as we all know, is like, so the TF's sitting there, and this was one side of the garage. What happened was you took the fenders off, and they ended up on the other side of the garage, and the doors are on the other side. So it takes up a two-car garage, which in the summer, my mom was fine with that, right? The deal was one half for Dad and one half for Mom, right? But then fall came along. It was starting to get cold, and, you know, the ice was starting to come, and so my mom goes to my dad, well, you know, I don't mind lending my half of the garage for the summer, but you're not going to have it through the winter. And he's like, oh, my gosh, what am I going to do now? So what he wanted to do was build a workshop. So initially what he did was we moved the car out to the manufacturing plant that he has, which was like 5 miles away. And he was going to have one of the people that worked there kind of moonlight and working on the car. And that kind of slowed down my work on it because it was, you know, I was too young to drive. It was 5 miles away. You couldn't ride your bicycle out there because it was on the highway. So unless I could get somebody to take me out there to work on it, which I did sometimes. But so he decided he wanted to build a shop next to the house. But that was going to take a year. He knew that. So what I drew this up so that we lived on a cul-de-sac like this. And initially, you know, this was a driveway. This was a two-car garage where we were working initially. And our lot was kind of very pie-shaped, right? It was real narrow in the front, and then it widened out big time. And he wanted to build a workshop here. So there wasn't a lot. There was like, this is about 12 feet here. It was pretty narrow, but it widened out quite a bit. So he staked this out to get the workshop built. And after he staked it out, my mom comes home, and she's looking around at the stakes, and she knew that he was wanting to build a workshop, and she's like, well, what are the stakes for? And he said, well, this is the workshop we're going to add on the side of the garage, you know. And she's looking at it, and she said, well, hold it. This is my kitchen window, and you're going to move the workshop all the way out to here? I'm not going to have a window. I'm going to be looking into the workshop. That's not happening, right? So the workshop ended here, which actually, it might, I mean, he was thinking of the future. We called it the workshop, but it was probably big enough for like 6 or 8 MGT series. Anyway, so he got the workshop built in the next year. And if we can flip that, that's the car all apart. And flip another one, and there's the frame painted. Probably in the work. So we moved into the workshop in the next spring. I think they built it that winter, and it was like paradise, right? I mean, we had heat, we had TV. You know, it was beautiful. But there was one big problem, was that when you were out there working, and you know, the air compressor might be running or something else, and it was time for dinner. You know, my mom always had to come out of the kitchen and walk over here and yell at you, it's time for dinner, right? And she hated that. So my dad devised a system. It was called the bell, right? So he hooked up this bell. There was a button right here inside the kitchen, and there was a bell out here in the workshop. And so when the bell rang, you had 5 minutes to wash your hands and get inside and sit down. That was the deal. If you didn't come in 5 minutes, you didn't get to eat. And then that worked pretty good. So we finished, you know, putting his car together. When I say we restored it, we did all the mechanical work. We did not do the finish painting of the body and the interior. Once it got to the point where it needed that, then it went to there was a restorer in Detroit called Parker's Garage, and they actually finished the car. So if we can flip again. So then when I was 12, after we had done restoring his car we started in 68, and it was probably, I think it was 3 years, it was 2 or 3 years it was done. So when I was 12, he asked me what I wanted for Christmas, and I said, well, since I helped you restore your TF, I want a TF of my own, right? Thinking, I mean, I thought, no way, that's never going to happen. But when I turned 12, he did get me a TF, and this was Christmas Day. This was actually in front of the factory. So he had found this slightly derelict MG that came in the back of a pickup, and that was the journey on doing my TF, which was, because I had done his, it was a little bit easier because, you know, not that I knew how to do everything, but I knew how to do some other stuff. So if we flip again, so my TF was interesting because he found a complete MGTF taken apart except for the body in Detroit. And what had happened, there had been a young gentleman and his friend who were going to restore this TF, and they took it apart and put it in the basement of their parents' house, and then the half of that group got drafted into the Army, or joined the Army, and he was the mechanically inclined part of that group. So after like a year, I think the parents said, get this thing out of my basement. So he bought a TF all in pieces, like this, and then the only thing that was missing was the body. Apparently the body was so bad and rusty they threw it out. So he managed to find a body somewhere else to blend those together. So if we flip again, that's again more parts. This is in the workshop at the house. And flip again. So here I am painting the frame. You know, basically, I did all the painting outside. Of course, you can see I'm not wearing a respirator, but that was a long time ago. And then actually the floorboards are floorboards of the car right here. You can see here, and there's the rear axle. So part of the problem with the workshop was the one thing we didn't have. There was a few things we didn't have. Is we didn't have a sandblaster, right, for cleaning parts and stuff like that. So like the frame we had sandblasted somewhere else because it's too big. But at the factory, they had a sandblaster. So, but again, it wasn't easy to get out there, but I managed to get out there and sandblast a bunch of parts at a certain time. So if we can flip again. So these are the leaf springs, front suspension parts. So I kind of devised this. This is like a piece of plywood with, I don't know if you see the little coaster on it, but I put a bunch of parts on it and then spray paint them outside, and then I could roll them inside and let them dry, like if it was going to rain pretty soon or something like that. So it kind of rolled in and out. Yep. And if we can flip the picture again, there I am sitting in the frame, hoping one day I'll have a car. Flip again. And there's actually the engine's in it, so it's starting to get more like a car than it was before. We're going to flip one more time. So when we got it running, one of the things that we wanted to do was make sure that the gearbox and everything was fine before we put the body on it, because if you put the body on and there was a problem with the gearbox or something else, it was a lot of work to take it off. So we had the rear springs re-arched, and without the weight of the body on it, the frame was too high and the drive shaft would rub. So that's why there's all these salt bags on the back of it to get enough weight on it. So, and I would drive it around because we lived on a cul-de-sac and our street was really short. Our street was maybe the width of this building, right? So I would drive it around. Actually, there's video of it in the welcoming video. There's video of it, and it's funny because some of the salt bags fall off as I go around the corner. But that worked. I drove it like 5 or 6 miles to make sure everything worked before that we'd start putting the body on. Then if we can flip again. So then this is actually Parker's garage. So again, like my dad's car, once we mechanically got it all finished, it went to Parker's garage to get painted and do the interior. And so this was Mr. Parker here, and there I am there. So here the car is finished. And this is probably 1975 or 76. We can flip again. So when I finished it in 76, my birthday was in September, so there was a meet in Toronto, Ontario. That's the first meet I took it to. So I would have had my driver's permit at that point, which means you could drive with your parents. Quite honestly, I drove a lot without them, but nobody really cared at that time. But so we went up to Toronto, and I actually won first place with my TF back then. So if we can flip again. So then the next big hurdle was getting my driver's license. Now, Romeo had 10,000 people in it, right? And the office that sold license plates and did driver's license, there was one lady that worked there. It was this lady here. I actually emailed my dad last week. I don't remember her name, and he doesn't remember her name either. But his TF had been running around for like a year and a half or 2 years, and she had always asked her, or she was always asking him when he was going in to get license plates, can I get a ride in your car? And he would always say, well, my son's restoring his car, and when it's done, you can get a ride in it, right? So we drove down there. He drove down to make it look good, and I rode. And so we got in, and she said, okay, now I want you to go out here and go up Main Street and turn left into this house like a half a mile away. She goes, I want my neighbor to see the car. And then we drove back, and she gave me my license. I think I've been driving quite a bit at that point. She probably knew that or sensed that, so there was no real test. But that was fun, taking my driver's training test in it. And then if we flip again, so there she is in the car. Obviously, my dad would have taken these pictures of us going out. Yep, and if we can flip again. So one of the other things is, we went to, at that time, there was a Michigan club, local MGT Michigan club. There was one in Ohio, and there was one in Ontario. And they were small clubs. They had maybe 30 or 40 members, and if they had a meet, they would have 15 or 20 cars. But this is actually I was in England with my dad at some point, but there was a couple that lived in Ohio that I guess liked me, and they actually made this jacket, and she was apparently a great person with sewing, because really this is just like green material that she put in there, and then she used stitching to make the wheels and the grill and everything. It's really, I think, is it still over there, this jacket? No? Derek? I think I still have that jacket. I don't fit it anymore, but I still have it. So that was really a neat thing. So if we can flip again. So one of the epic trips that we took in my TF, and there were a few, was, so initially the MG Club, the big meet was only on East Coast. It was a New England MGT register in the beginning. And then as the numbers grew, they started to do a West Coast meet also. And so this was 1977. So the meet was in Olympia, Washington. And at the meet, they always had what they called the distance award. So the person that drove their car to the show the longest distance got the distance award. So my dad had this idea that I should try to get the distance award. So what was going to happen, and it wasn't point to point. Like if you lived in Detroit and went to Olympia, Washington, that's not what they call the distance. It was the distance you drove. So what he wanted me, my sister there, Debbie, who was a little bit older, she was in college. She went to school in Boston, Massachusetts. And she was an enthusiast of MG. So the deal was I was going to drive from Detroit to Boston, which was like 800 miles, pick her up, and then we were going to drive across the country to Olympia, Washington. Now my dad, he also wanted to go, but he couldn't get, that was like going to be at least a week and a half trip one way, right? He couldn't get that much time off work. So I think he met us in Ohio or something like that. So I went to pick up Debbie. This is probably a picture out west, though, because we rigged up some kind of scoop to get a little bit of cool air in the car. Debbie's complaining about being hot, I guess, obviously. So, and I'm sure my dad is the one that took that picture in the car next to us. If we can flip one more. And there we are. There's my dad's car, and there's my car somewhere in a parking lot. Flip one more. And Debbie drove part of the time, too. I mean, I probably drove most of the time, but Debbie drove, too. So there we are. And then there we are out west with both of the cars. And then one more. And there's me and Debbie sitting somewhere. Again, Debbie's driving. And so my dad had bad luck. So we're like probably within 300 or 400 miles of Olympia. Can't remember exactly where it was at. And his car broke a piston. And here you can see it on the back of the wrecker. So it was one of those things that you couldn't fix. So we ended up getting to the meet. I ended up winning the distance award. I think it was 4,500 miles total. It was a huge number. And actually, it was such a huge number that after that, they changed the rules that you could only log mileage from where you lived to where the event was, right? You couldn't, like, drive around the country. Of course, I was lucky. I was a kid, right? So I could drive around for 2 or 3 weeks. It was no big deal. My dad ended up flying home and shipping his car back. So if we can flip again. So one of the things I wanted to do was, do coast to coast. I didn't actually drive the front wheels into the water. But and I think this was the West Coast, but I'm not quite sure if this was. I mean, that's not Boston, obviously, but that would have been somewhere on the West Coast where I took that. Flip one more. So that's the story of my MG. I mean, there's lots of other stories that relate to that car, but there's just one other little story I want to share. We knew a couple in Michigan that belonged to the MG Club, and they were. He was a doctor. His name was Dr. Brown. And we'd see them at quite a few of the shows. And one time they were going to go out to Lime Rock and race their MG. And the thing I don't remember is if I was 18 here or not. I'm thinking I was not 18 yet. But me and my dad wanted to go out and watch. I was like, oh, Dad, let's go watch. It'd be fun. He was in for that and everything. So we went out and watched. And they called the race the Double 3. So practice was on Saturday, and it was an MG-only race. And I think it had to be T-Series or before. And then on Sunday, they were going to do a 3-hour enduro, and then a 1-hour break, and another 3-hour enduro. So Mr. Brown and his wife went out. We watched him on Saturday. And then Saturday afternoon, he came up to me and he said, my wife went out and practiced, and she doesn't want to drive. She doesn't want to drive. And I don't want to drive the whole thing by myself. Do you want to drive? And I'm like, yeah, I'll drive. Sure. And the amazing thing was, I don't remember signing anything. I don't remember filling anything out, right? And this is kind of a stock TD. I mean, they took the windshield off and the side panels, right? And he's got a little bit of a racing seat. But, I mean, the tires were stock and everything. So it went 90 miles an hour. And so he came in after the first hour, and there I am getting in. Actually, I have my Nomex blue jeans on, and actually I have my MG belt on. But safety wasn't, and obviously no roll bar. So I drove the first hour, and I came in, and he said, I don't know. I'm still kind of tired. Do you want to drive another hour? I said, yeah, why not? So I drove another hour, and then they had the 1-hour break, And they started the third 3-hour thing. I think he started the second 3-hour thing. He drove 1 hour, and then I started to drive. And then somebody rolled their car. It was Jerry Gogan, actually, I remember, which was a big MG guy. He had like a J2 or something like that. And on one of the fast hills, he rolled his car over and unfortunately kept his hands on the wheels, and he ground off a couple of his fingers, which was not a good thing. And so they stopped the race, and that was kind of the end of it. But that was the beginning of my racing career. No license, no signing anything. So it's, and obviously, not even a full-face helmet. But that's the way they did it back in, that would have been 77 probably, yeah. So anyway, that's, any questions? Okay.
If you guys will just raise your hand, and I'll bring the microphone to you, and ask away, pertaining to the lecture, please. Don't ask all kinds of questions. Okay. Anybody have any questions for Jeff? Oh, hang on, Eric, come to you.
So Jeff, you went from there, and you also have a license to race, and you've been on the track many, many times. Right?
Yep.
So back then, it was basically get in and woohoo, here we go. What was the transition to become a licensed race car driver? And by the way, are you still licensed to race on the track?
Yeah, I haven't raced in a while, but to get a license, after you had to be 18, right, in everywhere I knew, and then you had to go through a driver's school, which was a 2-day event typically, and then you had to pass, right? If they didn't think you were going to be safe or doing a good job, they were going to fail you. So that was then I didn't even think about it, right? But after I got my license and everything, I thought, well, that really seems kind of odd that you didn't have to sign anything or do anything to drive. But it was older days, and it was a very laid back type of thing. And when you say racing, it wasn't like people were banging against each other. There were like 25 cars on this big track, and there was different varying speeds, right? So, and it was like if somebody was coming up behind you faster, you didn't try to move over on them like that. You were still trying to go fast, but it wasn't serious like head-to-head racing.
And are you still a licensed driver?
I'm not, nope.
Jeff, I wonder if you'd share with the folks when we raced at Mid-Ohio, our Volvos from hell, and what happened. What happened in that race?
So you're referring to the bumping incident? Yes. Yeah, so I raced with Bob Chris for years and years, mostly with Volvo 142s, Volvos from hell. So my recollection of that is I was trying to pass Bob, and he was blocking me. Big time. And so I finally figured the only way I'm going to get by him is just try to dive inside at the end of the back straight, and I did that. He came over. There was a little bit of contact, and I think the stewards weren't very happy about that, right? But he came, after we got out, he came out and shook my hand and said, good. I never did get in front of him, though. He said, good race, but I think that they put me on probation for that.
Put you on probation, and you sent me a tail light to replace the one.
That's right, I broke his tail light. Yep. The stewards weren't happy, but we had a great time. I don't know why. Yeah, it was great. So, yeah.
And you still have the TF.
I do, yeah.
That's just amazing.
Yep.
So yeah, you still have the TF. You have almost 600 other vehicles. Has it ever crossed your mind to get rid of the TF, or have you ever got an offer that made you question getting rid of the TF?
I never ever thought about it, and nobody ever showed an interest, right? But I would never have any interest in getting rid of it. As I moved around, and when I was younger, and garage space was a real problem, right? It was always, there was times the TF sat in the garage, and I had a newer car, it sat outside, right? So it always sat inside somewhere, yeah. Yep. All right.
Hang on, Christine.
You can't ask questions.
I hope I have this right. Big Orange?
Big Orange, yes.
And I understand there's a story when you went to visit your parents with that?
Yeah, there's a great story about that. So there's a long story about Big Orange. I'll make it really quick. Is when I wanted to start racing a Volvo and ITB, a Volvo 140, I went and bought Big Orange in Knoxville, actually, because there weren't a lot of Volvos and 140s in this area, right? And then you buy a street car, then you buy the Griffith kit to put in the car and everything. And when I got the car back, it had there were two kinds of fuel injection. And this one had the wrong kind of fuel injection for what they use for race cars. So I'm like, oh, that's not going to work. And actually what happened was I ended up buying Bob Chris's car off of him instead of doing another race car. So Big Orange is a very ratty, rusty car that I've used for years. But I went down, my dad lives in a very nice gated community in West Palm Beach or West Palm Gardens. And I went down there one time to see him, probably for Christmas or something. I can't remember. And I drove Big Orange. And, of course, you have to go through the gate and tell them what your name is and who you're going to see. And the gate guy looks at me and he says, you can't leave that sit in the driveway. So my dad had his Mercedes S500. That could sit in the driveway, but we put Big Orange in his, we had a 5-car garage, but it was full of cars anyway. My dad's a car guy, right? So that went in the garage the couple days I was there, and his Mercedes got to sit outside.
So Jeff,
Yes.
why is it you don't have a VW bus in your collection?
I don't know. That's a good question. We need to ask Derek that. Right? Why don't we have a Volkswagen bus in the collection? Okay. All right. Any more?
Alex, you first, and then David.
Jeff, what do you have to still do to the car to keep it running, and how often do you take it out to drive?
My TF?
Uh-huh.
So I think did you do the work 3 or 4 years ago on it, Nick? Yeah, 3 or 4 years ago they did new radiator hoses, stainless exhaust, and so it doesn't require a lot of work. I try like in the spring. It has 56,000 miles on it now, so it has 0. But you know, when I was a kid, I would drive that as a daily driver in the summer. Right when I was in Michigan, I didn't drive it in the winter, but in the summertime I drove it. So I probably put the first 50,000 miles on it the first 5 years. But I drive it in the spring. I try to drive it 100 miles or so in the spring and 100 miles in the fall. Actually, we did a rally last year out west in it, 1,000-mile rally. So it still gets some use, not a lot, but yep.
So how long after the TF did the TC come about? Because I know that you've told me that you also did Coast to Coasts and Pikes Peak and all that sort of stuff in the TC.
Yeah, I have to think about that. So probably 2 or 3 years after the TF got done, I got the TC. I don't remember exactly now, but it wasn't too long, but it was a few years. Yeah, there's a few years. I think it might have been 3 or 4 before the TC showed up. Yeah. The TC actually was in good running condition when I got it, and then, no, let me see, I'm trying to think, and at some point, Wayne Penman restored it, which was a local restoration guy. But when I got it, yeah, it was a running car in good condition. Yep.
Did you put the supercharger on there, or did it already come with it?
So my TC doesn't have the supercharger.
Not the black and tan one. Okay.
That's not the black one. What's the other one? Cream one, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. All right.
Michael, did you have a question? Hang on.
After all these years and all these cars, what is the one car that got away?
You know, there's probably not just one, but yeah, there was a car, retromobile, that they were auctioning about 3 years ago. The one with the big glass dome. I can't remember the name of it. Dolio or something? You remember, Claude? Dolo. It was a one-of-a-kind, and it was a really neat car, and I'm sorry that that didn't get done, but it didn't get done. So, but there's probably others. That one I kind of remember. I kind of always think maybe Claude can find out who got it, and they can restore it, and then we can use it now, right? So, all right.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay. Again, thank you, everybody. Appreciate the support. Appreciate you coming out.